They bought our treasuries, and they bought our treasuries, and they bought our treasuries, and they built alliances with countries, some of whom we like and some of whom we're not overly fond of. And they signed energy deals with some countries who we're not overly fond of. This is where your war scenario comes in, by the way. And sometimes when it looks like the war that you're in isn't going very well, you actually decide that maybe another war will help distract the war that's not going very well. Bam, 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 ba-dam. Look over here, look over there, look over here, look over there, look over here. Distraction. This is not shock and awe. This is distraction. Pantomime. It's a pantomime war over here. Don't pay attention to this war over here. Now, close that circle. That circle closes kind of in an interesting scenario, doesn't it? Because along about this time next year, when all the troops are home, when we've tidied up that little mess that we're just closing the loop on right now, but when it's not as tidy as we thought it would be and we're still trying to close it up, and when, I don't know, a couple border disputes are up between an ally of ours and some of their neighbors with whom they don't get along, and words are spoken like we're going to bomb them back 20 years and things like that, when that kind of thing has happened, we could find ourselves in a very interesting summer. And that's a year from now. And that very interesting summer, a year from now, is when we have a very interesting opportunity as a society. We can take the course we've been on, or we can take another course. The course we've been on says that it might be expedient to have a war of distraction. That's okay. It would be tactical. It would be quick. We'd be in, we'd be out. Maybe. But the infrastructure that we would hit in that war would be financed by our treasuries. You heard me right. The infrastructure that we would hit would be financed by our treasuries. So we would blow up our Federal Reserve. Wow. Talk about asymmetric war. This is so asymmetric that we bomb ourselves. Because that capital adequacy problem, which is backed by our mortgage thing that we don't worry about because it's all mortgages and they're good and stable, and our need to rely on Islamic finance as a potential scenario to save our hide, could all kind of just blow up in smoke when we take out the gas lines, the $70 billion refining facilities, and the other strategic targets that we have in places where we don't like people who don't understand us. About 4 or 5 months before we need those people to support our banking system. Just for a point of clarification, today, our financial ally for 2008 is in the Middle East. And you heard me correctly. No cross-dependencies on the equities side, no cross-dependencies on the banking side. The one that doesn't sink when other things sink is the Middle East. It's not China. Lord knows it's not Japan, because Japan can't keep anything rated above B plus right now. In fact, it doesn't have any A-rated financial institution at all. So they're not going to be there for us. We don't find ourselves in a particularly financially strong position right now as a country, and our treasuries are owned by China. In that world, what I hope you heard in today's presentation isn't hopelessness, because it isn't hopeless. What it says is that we have an unusual opportunity. And the unusual opportunity is to stand on a precipice before you fell over it. To stand at a point in time when the events of our own construction could very well turn on us in ways that we can't imagine. And look to our neighbors now in a much broader sense of that term and say that between today and New Year's Eve 2007, we may have a little bit of bridge work to do. Halliburton can't bid on this contract. It's not going to be a sole source award. It's not going to be a single party interest. And it's not going to be somebody winning who insists that the world does it your way. Those of you who believe in that world, read the last debate on the Doha round on WTO. And if you still have questions, drop me an email and I can send you a picture of what it looks like. The fact of the matter is the day of arrogance is what I'm really talking about coming to an end. That's what I'm talking about. And John and I had a great conversation because he said, Dave, why are you still optimistic? You see all this stuff and it looks like everything's falling apart. And for some reason, you just seem to be optimistic. And so I'm going to leave you with a picture. The picture comes from Tehran on Easter Sunday night last year. I sat with the Ministry of the Interior, the Foreign Ministry, and I sat across the table from a group of young women who are part of the Foreign Ministry. And on what was the most lavish table that you could imagine, that was filled with saffron rice and with kebabs of every variety, and with some of the most fragrant foods and vegetables and everything else, mounted across the table in what would be a perfect set for kind of a Knights of the Round Table, Camelot picture. I sat there, surrounded by women and men of Tehran having dinner. And on the table were oranges. Now, these are beautiful oranges. And when I call an orange beautiful, that's actually really special, because as a kid, we lived at the homestead estate of the Pure Gold Orange Grove in California. And if you haven't ever heard of that, my condolences. It's how the gold rush really happened. It was California oranges at their best. Pure gold orange. We had 27 of those orange trees still in the early 70s at that house. And for Christmas, we'd go out and pick oranges off those trees, and that was Christmas presents for us. And that sounds weird. It sounds kind of corny. You get an orange for Christmas. But the oranges were that good. They were that good. They were really oranges. Amazing. And I was looking at this table, which was spread out before me, and on the table were oranges. And they looked dangerously close to as good as the oranges that I remember when I was a kid. So I thought I'd ask a very polite question. Are these oranges for decoration or are they to eat? So the young lady across the table said, no, sir, they're to eat. Enjoy them. And so I peeled an orange, and I peeled off a slice of the orange, and I popped that slice in my mouth. And unless you have ever had an orange from Shiraz, you don't know what I'm talking about. Because there is no orange juice. It's orange syrup. It is the most amazing, delightful, electrifying, wonderful flavor you could hope to have. Even if you don't like oranges. You'd sit there going, wow! That's oranges the way oranges were meant to be. And I said, would you like a slice? And I handed it across the table to this young lady. Ah. She recoiled. I said, don't you like the oranges? Oh, no, sir, I love these oranges. Well, have a slice. Sir, here, a man peeling an orange and giving it to a woman who's a stranger at the table would be considered inappropriate. So I'm not trying to offend somebody, but this orange is really good. I'd like you to have some. And she said, no, I can't do that. And so I said, well, what if I were to break it in half and set half of it on the table? I wouldn't give it to you. I'd set half of it on the table, and then you could pick it up, and I wouldn't have given it to you. And she looked at her friends, and she said, I think that might work. So I put it in half, and I put half of it on the table, and she picked it up, and it was wonderful to see the expression on her face when the first syrup of those oranges came into her mouth. And it was a beautiful moment. And I said, this has got to be the best orange I have ever had. And she said, of course they come from Shiraz. Well, silly me. Like I knew that. I didn't know that if it came from Shiraz, it had to be that good. But then she said, do you believe in God? I said, well, why do you ask? She said, well, do you believe in the Garden of Eden? I said, I'm really not following. What does believing in God, believing in the Garden of Eden have to do with this orange? She said, Shiraz is the Garden of Eden. This is the orange that was the first orange. Oranges here have never been hybridized. Oranges here have not ever been mass-produced. Oranges here have always been the way they were planted when the first orange was planted. She looked at me and she said, you've never had an orange. Why would I end with that story? Why would I end with that story? They are doing that. Cultural acknowledgement. Why? I'm not answering questions today, people. Why would I tell you that story? I'm asking you something. Why would I tell you that story? Your own memories of your own culture, the thing that you knew was the best that could ever happen, aren't always the best. What else? I found a way to share something in a taboo environment that wasn't taboo. By doing what? Changing what it meant to give. I didn't see a problem with handing her a piece of orange. I still don't see a problem with that. But she did.